You don't belong here. Rick's voice echoed through the marble-floored boardroom as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to break. The conference table stretched between us like a battlefield, and Manhattan's skyline pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, a city of dreams that suddenly felt like a jury box. My hands gripped the edge of my folder, knuckles white, as laughter rippled through the room. Not loud laughter. No, that would have been too obvious, too human. This was the polite corporate chuckle, the kind that tells you they've already decided you're the punchline before you've even finished speaking. Maybe stick to taking notes, Daniel, Rick continued, sliding my carefully prepared presentation across the table like trash. Let the senior team handle the real strategy work. I smiled, not because I was weak, not because I agreed with him, but because I knew something they didn't. Something that would shatter every assumption in that room within the next 60 seconds. Behind me, a door opened. The lawyer walked in carrying a black leather folder, and I watched Rick's confident smirk begin to crack at the edges. I watched the golden boy, the friend's son they'd promoted over me 3 times, shift uncomfortably in his chair. I watched the woman who once whispered that I just didn't get how things work here, suddenly sit up straighter. They had no idea what was about to happen. No idea that the immigrant they'd mocked for 5 years was about to become their boss. No idea that every insult, every dismissal, every condescending laugh had been fuel for something they couldn't possibly imagine. But before I tell you what happened next, before I show you the exact moment their world collapsed, you need to understand how we got here. Because this isn't just a revenge story, this is a blueprint. My name is Daniel Alvarez, and if you've ever been underestimated because of where you came from, how you speak, or who you know, this story is for you. Stay with me through every word, because what you're about to learn will change the way you see power, patience, and the art of the silent comeback. And trust me, the ending is even better than you think. I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, in a 2-bedroom apartment that somehow held 4 people, a lifetime of dreams, and the constant soundtrack of Roosevelt Avenue bleeding through the walls. My father worked the graveyard shift cleaning office buildings in Midtown Manhattan, the same glass towers where executives made in an hour what he made in a week. My mother left for work before sunrise, her hands already calloused from years of washing dishes in restaurants where she was invisible. Every night, I'd lie awake listening for their footsteps on the stairs. That sound, tired, deliberate, heavy with the weight of survival, became my lullaby. Daniel, in this country, they will test you twice before they respect you once. My father said this to me when I was 12 years old, sitting at our scratched kitchen table after I came home crying because a teacher told me to lose the accent if I wanted to be taken seriously. I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought respect was automatic if you worked hard enough, spoke clearly enough, smiled wide enough. I was wrong. By the time I was 16, I'd learned to make myself smaller. I spoke slower, softer, edited every sentence before it left my mouth. I watched American sitcoms to copy their rhythm, their cadence, their ease. But no matter how much I adjusted, molded, transformed myself, the judgment never changed. "Where are you from?" they'd ask. And it wasn't curiosity. It was a test, a way to categorize me before I'd finished my introduction. "Queens," I'd answer, because it was true. "No, where are you really from?" That pause, that tiny, venomous pause between really and from, held every assumption they'd already made about me. When I landed my first corporate job at 28 years old, I genuinely believed everything would change. I walked into that converted warehouse building in Long Island City wearing my father's watch and my mother's prayers. The office looked modern, glass walls, open floor plans, motivational posters about embracing diversity. But the people inside, they were operating on software from 1955. I'll never forget my first meeting. I arrived 15 minutes early, my presentation printed and bound, every word rehearsed until it was perfect. I'd spent 3 nights analyzing our client retention data and discovered a pattern no one else had noticed. A 7% quarterly decline that would compound into disaster within 18 months if we didn't pivot immediately. I was proud, nervous, but proud. Rick walked in 12 minutes late, coffee in hand, laughing at something on his phone. He took the seat at the head of the table like it was a throne. Didn't acknowledge me, didn't even look in my direction. "No, all right, folks, let's make this quick." His voice carried that casual authority that comes from never being questioned. Senior staff only today. Daniel, he glanced at me like I was furniture. Grab a chair in the back. Observe and learn. My stomach dropped. Actually, I prepared, I started, holding up my folder. Rick cut me off with a hand gesture. Didn't even let me finish the sentence. We've got this covered. Just take notes. Laughter scattered across the room. Not mean-spirited, they'd say later. Just friendly. Just corporate culture. But I heard what it really was. Dismissal. The sound of a door slamming before I'd even knocked. I sat in the back, silent, watching them discuss the exact problems I'd already solved. They proposed solutions that would fail. They ignored variables I'd highlighted. They congratulated themselves for ideas I'd emailed to Rick 3 days earlier, ideas he was now presenting as his own. Rick, that's brilliant, one director said, nodding enthusiastically. I wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and demand to be heard, wanted to flip the table and force them to see me. But instead, I did something smarter. I watched, I learned, I documented everything. The dismissals became a pattern, then a ritual, then just another part of the landscape. 3 months later, a position opened for junior director. I applied immediately, had every qualification, exceeded every metric, trained half the current directors myself. During my interview, the panel smiled politely while I presented my vision. 1 week later, they hired Rick's friend's son, 23 years old, fresh out of a mediocre business school. His biggest accomplishment was a family vacation to the Hamptons. We think you need to work on your communication skills, HR told me in a closed-door meeting, their voices dripping with false empathy. Cultural fit is really important here. Cultural fit. Code for, you remind us that we're uncomfortable. The promoted golden boy, let's call him Tyler, became my supervisor within 6 months. He'd come to my desk with questions about systems I built, processes I designed, clients I'd personally saved from leaving. Hey Daniel, quick question, he'd say, standing over my cubicle like I was tech support. I'd explain it slowly, patiently, swallowing the humiliation like medicine. Oh wow, you're like really smart, he'd say afterward, genuinely surprised, as if intelligence was supposed to come with a specific accent. The third rejection broke something in me. Not my spirit, never that, but it broke the illusion. The fantasy that hard work alone would ever be enough in a system designed to keep people like me in the back row. I remember the exact moment. I was standing in the parking lot after work, staring at the city skyline, when my father called. How was your day, mijo? They passed me over again, papa. Silence on the other end. Not shock. He'd lived this story himself. So what will you do? He finally asked. I don't know. Then let me tell you something your grandfather told me when I first came to this country. His voice grew steady, certain. When they close the door, you don't break it down. You build your own house, and then you buy the building. That night, I sat in my small Queens apartment, the same neighborhood where I grew up, and opened my laptop, not to browse, not to escape, but to build. I started small, ridiculously small. A friend from the neighborhood, Carlos Dash, owned a small shop importing goods from Latin America. He was struggling with distribution costs, drowning in middleman fees, losing money on every shipment. What if I could get you better rates? I asked him over coffee at our local diner. Daniel, if you can do that, I'll owe you forever. I spent 3 weeks researching wholesale logistics, calling suppliers, negotiating contracts. I used vacation days to visit warehouses in Newark, Brooklyn, the Bronx. I learned the language of freight, customs, distribution networks. Within 2 months, I'd saved Carlos 30% on his costs. Within 6 months, 5 other shop owners asked me to do the same for them. Within a year, I had a small but growing side business, one that earned me more in profit than my professional job in Long Island City. But here's the thing, I told no one at work, not because I was ashamed, but because invisibility had become my superpower. When people think you're irrelevant, they reveal everything. They gossip in front of you. They leave confidential documents on printers. They discuss strategy like you're a piece of furniture. And I listened. I learned that the company was hemorrhaging clients, that their supply chain was outdated by 15 years, that their margins were shrinking because they refused to adapt to new distribution models. The same models I was perfecting in my nights and weekends. By year 3, my side business had grown exponentially. I had warehouses, employees, clients across 3 states. A distribution network that worked because I'd built it with the same people corporations ignored. Immigrants who understood efficiency, reliability, and respect. By year 4, I was earning 6 times my corporate salary. By year 5, I realized something extraordinary. The company that told me I'd never be management material was failing at everything I'd already mastered. They were losing the same clients I was gaining. Their costs were rising while mine were dropping. Their model was dying while mine was thriving. And one night, sitting in my small home office with Queens traffic humming outside my window, I had a thought that made my hands shake. I could buy them. Not as revenge, though that was certainly part of it, but as strategy, as expansion, as the final proof that their judgment of me was the biggest mistake of their professional lives. Acquiring a company isn't like buying a car. It's complex, strategic, requires capital, legal teams, months of negotiation. But I had something they didn't. I knew their weaknesses intimately. I knew which clients were unhappy, which contracts were ending, which vendors were fed up with late payments. I knew because I'd been invisible in their meetings for years. I approached their 3 biggest clients privately, offered them better terms, better service, better respect. All 3 signed with my company within 60 days. When their quarterly report showed a 15% revenue drop, the board panicked. The stock price fell. Investors started asking questions. That's when I made my move. Through a private equity firm, I stayed anonymous. I began buying shares. Not aggressively, slowly, patiently. The same patience I'd learned from years of being overlooked. 6 months later, I owned 32% of the company. 3 months after that, a board member facing retirement wanted out. I bought his shares privately. Suddenly, I had controlling interest, and they had no idea who I was, which brings us back to that boardroom. Rick's voice cutting through the air. "You don't belong here." The lawyer walking in with that black folder. The silence falling like snow. "I'm here on behalf of the acquiring party," the lawyer announced, his voice professional, detached, devastating. Rick frowned, irritated at the interruption. "Acquiring party? There's no acquisition." "Actually, there is." The lawyer placed documents on the table. "As of this morning, controlling interest in this company has been transferred to Mr. Daniel Alvarez." The room froze. You know that moment in movies when time stops, when sound gets muffled and everyone moves in slow motion? That's not Hollywood exaggeration. That's exactly what happened. Rick's face went white, then red, then gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tyler, the golden boy who'd been promoted over me 3 times, literally stood up from his chair like he'd been shocked. "What?" someone whispered. The lawyer continued, calm and methodical. "Mr. Alvarez has requested a full review of all management positions, starting immediately. He'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next week." 20 pairs of eyes turned to me, not with mockery this time, not with dismissal, with fear, with shock, with the sudden, crushing realization that every insult, every laugh, every condescending moment was now documented in the memory of the person who controlled their futures. I stood slowly, savoring the moment I'd imagined 1,000 times. "You're right about one thing, Rick," I said quietly, my accent never clearer, never prouder. I didn't belong here. I walked to the head of the table, his seat, his throne, and placed my hand on the back of the chair. I belonged somewhere better, building something you couldn't imagine, learning lessons you'll never understand. And now, I sat down, looked at each face around that table, and smiled. Now I own the building you thought I'd never even enter. The days after the acquisition were surreal. Rick requested a private meeting, stood in my new office, the corner office with the Manhattan view, and literally shook as he apologized. "But Daniel, I never meant—" His voice cracked. "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked," I said simply. "You saw my accent and decided you knew everything about me, saw my background and assumed I had nothing to offer. That wasn't ignorance, Rick. That was a choice." I didn't fire him immediately. That would have been too easy, too quick. Instead, I did something that felt more meaningful. I restructured the entire company around merit, not connections, around ideas, not pedigree, around respect, not proximity to power. The warehouse workers, the people who reminded me of my parents, got raises and pathways to management. The single mother in accounting who'd been stuck at the same position for 8 years got promoted to director. The guy from the Bronx who everyone dismissed because he didn't go to the right schools became head of operations, and they thrived. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction doubled. Within a year, we'd regained the clients we'd lost and added 15 more. Within 18 months, the company was more profitable than it had been in a decade. Not because I was a genius, but because I'd learned what they never understood. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity doesn't. Late one night, I stood alone in that same conference room where Rick had humiliated me. The city glittered beyond the glass, infinite and indifferent. I thought about my father's words, "Build your own house, then buy the building." I thought about every dismissal, every closed door, every time someone made me feel small, and I realized something profound. They didn't break me, they built me. Every insult became motivation, every rejection became redirection. Every moment of humiliation became a classroom where I learned patience, strategy, and the power of being underestimated. See, here's what people don't understand about revenge. The best kind isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's taking everything they used against you and turning it into the foundation of something they could never build. My accent? It became my bridge to communities they ignored. My background? It became my blueprint for resilience. Their dismissal? It became my invisibility cloak, the shield that let me observe, learn, and build in plain sight. 6 months after the acquisition, I held an all-staff meeting. The same people who'd laughed at my ideas were now implementing them. The same board that rejected my applications was now asking for my approval. The same culture that told me I'd never belong was now being rebuilt in the image of respect I'd always deserved. "I want to tell you all something," I said, standing at that podium with 500 employees looking up at me. "I didn't buy this company for revenge. I bought it because I saw potential you were wasting. I saw talent you were ignoring. I saw a future you were too comfortable to build." I paused, let the words sink in. "But I also want you to remember this moment. Remember that the person you dismiss, ignore, or underestimate might be the person who changes everything. Not because they want to hurt you, but because you taught them how to see what you couldn't." The room was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of before, but the silence of people actually listening. Tyler, the golden boy, approached me after the meeting, eyes red. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I was arrogant, ignorant. I took that position knowing you deserved it more." "I know," I said. "Are you going to fire me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the privilege he was born with and the humility he was learning. "No," I finally said. "But I am going to teach you what no one taught me, how to earn what you're given, how to respect what you didn't build, how to lead without needing to diminish others." He nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his eyes. That's the thing about real power. It's not about destruction, it's about reconstruction. Today, the company is thriving. We've expanded into 6 states. Our employee retention is the highest in the industry. We're known not just for profit, but for culture. And every time someone new joins, I tell them my story, not because I want praise, but because I want them to understand, wherever you come from, whatever accent you carry, however many times you've been told you don't belong, those moments are not your ceiling. They're your foundation. I walk through the building sometimes late at night when everyone's gone home, past the conference room where Rick dismissed me, past the cubicle where I once sat invisible, past the office I was told I'd never earn. And I think about my father, cleaning buildings in the middle of the night so I could dream in the daylight. I think about my mother, who never saw the inside of a boardroom but understood more about leadership than anyone in that building ever did. I think about every immigrant, every outsider, every person who's been made to feel small by people who mistake privilege for merit. This story, my story, is for them, because the greatest revenge isn't making them suffer. It's proving they were wrong. It's building something so undeniable that their judgment becomes irrelevant. It's transforming their cruelty into your curriculum, and it's walking through doors they said you'd never reach, then holding them open for everyone who comes after you. But here's what I never told anyone. The real reason this story matters more than you think. 3 years after the acquisition, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. It was from a young woman named Maria. She'd worked in our warehouse for 6 years, the same warehouse where my parents might have worked if they'd had different luck. The letter was simple. "Mr. Alvarez, I heard your story at the company meeting. My son heard it too. He's 15 and thinks his accent makes him stupid. I showed him what you built. Now he believes he can build something too. Thank you for proving we belong. I kept that letter in my desk drawer. Read it on hard days, on days when old doubts crept back, on days when I wondered if any of this mattered, and I realized this was never about me. It was about every kid in Queens listening to their parents, tired footsteps, every teenager editing their words to sound acceptable, every employee sitting in the back of a conference room, invisible, but watching everything. The revenge wasn't in the takeover. The revenge was in the transformation. The revenge was in proving that the ladder they said I couldn't climb wasn't even the right ladder, that I could build something better from scratch, that their judgment wasn't truth. It was just noise from people who confused luck with talent. So, when people ask me if I regret anything, if I wish I'd confronted Rick earlier, spoken up more, demanded respect, I tell them this: no, because silence taught me to listen, invisibility taught me to observe, rejection taught me to build, and humiliation taught me that the opinion of people who never tried to know me was never a reflection of my worth. Your difference isn't your burden, it's your blueprint. Your struggle isn't your weakness, it's your curriculum. And the people who underestimate you, they're not obstacles. They're just the opening act of a story they'll never see coming. Remember my name, remember my story. And remember this: the next time someone tells you that you don't belong, smile. Not because you agree, but because you know something they don't. You're not trying to fit into their world. You're building a better one.